after the death of McKinley, a new political star reached its zenith. Theodore Roosevelt, Police Commissioner, Undersecretary of the Navy, Colonel of the Rough Riders, Governor of New York, Vice President of the United States, and now President. It was a time of vast change in our country. Our tremendous industrial might was beginning to make itself felt all over the world. New inventions and new ideas were expanding our commerce and developing our land. Factories were springing up in our cities and bringing more and more people to those cities. But New York's police force still clung to the horse. Other conditions and situations might be subject to change, but these policemen would continue to put their dependence in a means of conveyance with which they were thoroughly familiar. New York was beginning to grow toward the sky. Buildings got higher and higher, and the expression man-made canyons now has a visual meaning. These buildings, forerunners of still greater structures to come, are now the highest in the world. Chicago, the meatpacking center of the world, was considered a Western city. Here are views of the famous Loop, taken in 1901. The first major crisis in Roosevelt's administration came in 1902, when Germany blockaded Venezuela for defaulting on her international debts. Roosevelt immediately dispatched Admiral Dewey and the American Navy to break the blockade, and was supported by Britain. So Germany wisely decided to recall its fleet. Thus the blockade was broken and the Monroe Doctrine reaffirmed. America was now a world power, and the temper and mettle of our country was established in the mind of Europe. Although this was now the 20th century and a period of great change in military equipment and methods, our Navy training still included instruction in the use of the old-fashioned cutlass. It was difficult to make the old-timers in the Navy Department realize that things have changed. Enlisted men were still trained on sailing ships. Although our Navy was now almost 100% steam, the old tradition of sailors who sailed would not die. Our gunners were among the finest naval marksmen in the world. Roosevelt made certain of this by instituting special target practice with all types and calibers of Navy guns. The President fought vigorously for the interests of the working man and against the long hours and low wages of the sweatshops and factory systems of the day. This was the real beginning of the great forward march of labor in our country, and it was never to stop. By this year, women have won the right to work in factories. It is still very much a man's world, but women are finally working outside the home and are fast becoming an ever-increasing part of our labor potential. New York subway was ready to open in 1904, and it was an important event in the history of Manhattan and its environs. These happy and excited crowds are hurrying into the entrances to become the vanguard of the millions upon millions who will jam these subways in the years to come. It was a tremendous engineering feat, and it took 4 years to build. But it was the greatest and most efficient system for moving large bodies of people ever devised, and it is so regarded to this day. While the New York subway system has been expanded and improved decade by decade, it still uses the same stations and the same procedural methods it did when these historic pictures were first made. Like many other things, the best motion pictures in 1904 came from Europe. Here we see In the Days of Louis XVI, made by Pathé Frères of Paris. In those days, 3 reels, much like this one, cost a nickel to see, hence the name Nickelodeon. Now watch the picture. You'll see it exactly as it was first shown back in 1904. Teddy Roosevelt was a man of tremendous charm and vitality, and he added greatly to the American language of the day with his pungent and pithy expressions. His bully was a stamp of approval for a piece of legislation, a good sporting event, or a fine work of art. People thronged to hear him speak and cheered him when he said, "Speak softly, but carry a big stick." This was language they understood and appreciated. His scornful mollycoddle was sufficient to condemn anyone he was against. He could make it sound like the lowest form of invective. His toothy "delighted" brought happy and responsive smiles from all who heard it. It was such an expression of pure enjoyment from a man who was used to living life to its fullest. When he thundered against the malefactors of great wealth, he brought the listening crowds to their feet and made the business tycoons frown with annoyance. He was one of the most colorful figures of our political world up to that time. In 1904, he was running for re-election against Judge Alton B. Parker of New York. Roosevelt had compiled an impressive record during his first administration. He'd broken the big business trusts. He was responsible for legislation controlling railroad rates and the Pure Food and Drug Act, among others. When the voters went to the polls in 1904, they elected him over the Democratic nominee 7.5 million to 5 million. In that day, less than 13 million votes were cast in a presidential election. His inauguration in 1905 was a happy and gala event. Here we see him riding from the White House to the Capitol for the swearing-in ceremony. He's accompanied by a guard of honor and dignitaries of the day. In his speech to the nation, he repeated the issues of the day and outlined the progressive legislation for which he would fight. Roosevelt was a man of great determination, and very few of his listeners doubted he would accomplish what he set out to do. Here, in the inaugural parade that followed the speech, we see the naval cadets from Annapolis passing the reviewing stand in their bright dress uniforms. Teddy's heroic and beloved Rough Riders also had a prominent place in the line of march and drew enthusiastic cheers from the sidewalk throngs lining the route. And here we see the West Point Cadets, then as now, the best trained military group in the entire world. After the parade, there was a reception at which the Rough Riders were present to be greeted personally by the President. And so were ushered in another 4 years under the guidance of T.R. Probably the most enduring monument to his memory is the Roosevelt Dam in Arizona. He was the first president to take steps to conserve our natural resources. He set aside vast mineral and forest reserves. He acquired government water rights and otherwise tried to protect our land against wastage and exploitation. This great dam will ever keep his memory fresh in the minds and hearts of our people.